There is a centerpiece in this prayer room, and it is a large stained glass window with George Washington between the two sides of the Great Seal of the United States. But what is striking about the feature of this artwork is that the order of the seal is inverted against protocol. And by that what I mean is that the reverse side of the seal that ought to be at the bottom is above Washington's head in this painting, and the front of the seal that ought to be at the top is shown under his feet. And in that position, Washington is seen in this important piece of artwork inside the Congressional Prayer Room. He is seen on his knees praying beneath the uncapped pyramid in the all-seeing eye of Horus, Osiris, Apollo, and I would leave it to the listeners to interpret what I think that is clearly meant to signify. But of course, there's other vitally important parts of the lost symbol that also have to do with other issues, not just the artwork. But that's a brief sampling, and we talk about more of that, of course, in the book.
Well, in research to the development of this book, you went physically to Washington, and I understand you went to a number of these buildings in Washington and saw a lot of this stuff for yourself.
Yeah, we actually did. We went to Washington, D.C., we went inside the Capitol Dome. We took images and pictures. We studied the artwork that was there. We also went to the Herodome, which we talked about earlier in this series, which is, of course, the mother lodge of the world. It is the building that houses the library and other documents that are important to the highest degree, the 33rd degree Freemason Council over Washington, D.C., where they also have their prayer room, their temple room, much of which was popularized in the latest book by the lost symbol, which, of course, maybe we can talk about a little bit later.
And, Tom, you've also said that combined with this imagery, important and meaningful occult numerology is directly connected to these images and structures in D.C., and that this holds the key to how the occultists interpret their meaning and proves concretely that you're only now making publicly known what the Freemasons and Kabbalists have known for centuries about America's intended destiny. Tell us about the numerology that holds the key to this puzzle.
Yeah, well, besides the pagan gods that accompany Washington inside these various pieces of artwork and inside the Capitol Dome, and of course inside that famous painting, the apotheosis of George Washington, there is numerology, and this makes it doubly important because it means that these pieces of artwork weren't by private interpretation. At some level, this was actually being dictated by people who were metaphysicians. They were occultists. They were Kabbalists. They understood.
It wasn't all just by accident.
Well, that would have made it unusual just by itself that you would have the redundancy of these various pieces of artwork showing Washington and other key figures in D.C. as being Jupiter or Zeus in flesh, and in death becoming Osiris. But then when you couple the fact that both those Egyptian and Greek motifs are carried over onto the Great Seal of the United States concerning the prophecy of the return of Apollo, that all by itself would say that this is in the order of hundreds of millions to one, that it would have happened by chance without some unseen hand understanding the magical properties. But then when you add to it the numerology, that's when you really nail this down, that these specific numbers, measurements, and their direct connection to deep esoteric belief among the founders of the nation puts all of this together. I'll give you an illustration of what I mean. Numerology that's associated with the legend of Isis and Osiris is also encoded throughout the painting of the apotheosis of George Washington. You can see that in the 13 maidens, 13, of course, being the number of pieces of Osiris that Isis was able to find after he had been killed by his evil brother Seth. There's also 6 scenes of pagan gods around the perimeter that form a hexagram. and so on. But the most important of all of the symbolism in the apotheosis of Washington, for instance, is that the entire scene is bounded by the powerful Pythagorean binding utility, 72 five-pointed stars within circles, forming a giant circle at the base of the dome. In other words, if somebody hearing this were to travel to Washington, D.C. and go on tour, go inside the U.S. Capitol Dome, stand beneath the pregnant belly of Isis, the Capitol Dome, and look up inside the dome, they will see the painting, the apotheosis of Washington with all these different pagan gods that I think we've already talked about. But at the base of that, the circle at the bottom of the dome, there is a circle of exactly 72 circled star pentagrams. Now, of course, pentagrams are already widely known and understood for their magical properties in all kinds of variations of occultism. Inside Masonry, there's also been many of their historians, and their Gnostics especially, that have written about the relevance of the number 72 and the alchemy that is related to it. For instance, in the Kabbalah and other Freemasonic and Jewish apocalyptic writings, the number 72 equals the number of wings that Enoch received when he was transformed into Metatron. People can read about that in 3 Enoch 9:2. Why this is important, and I won't go into it here, but why it's important is this: is if somebody reads my book and they read about the words of George W. Bush, who invoked the angel in the whirlwind, and how that was followed by people standing up in front of the U.S. Senate praying to the angel in the whirlwind. The angel in the whirlwind is the angel that Enoch became when he was transformed into Metatron. This is the most powerful of all the angels, and he has power over all of the other angels that are important for administrating the affairs of the earth. The 72 angels that are assigned to administrate the affairs of the earth are controlled by him. So the number 72 then, in esoteric belief, becomes very, very important and is typically a reference to these cosmocraters. Now, in the context of the U.S. Capitol Dome and the 72 stars that circle Washington's apotheosis in the womb of Isis, the significance of this symbolism is very important because in sacred literature, including, by the way, in the Bible, stars are symbolic of angels. And within Gnosticism, 72 is the number of these fallen angels or cosmocraters that administer the affairs of the earth. So experts in the study, for instance, people like Dr. Michael Heiser, who we've interviewed before, he wrote his thesis on the Divine Council. And people like that believe that beginning at the Tower of Babel, the world and its inhabitants became disenfranchised by the sovereign God of Israel. They were placed under the authority of these lesser divine beings, these angels, which then became corrupt and disloyal to God in their administration of the nations. Psalms 82, I think, is one of the primary verses people use to point to this. And these beings then ultimately started becoming worshipped on earth as gods following Babel. That was led by Nimrod, Gilgamesh, Osiris, Apollo, the very figure that is central to this entire 4 hours of conversations that we've been having. Well, consistent within that tradition, the designers of the U.S. Capitol Dome, they did 3 really important telling things with regard to this. Number one, they circled the apotheosis of Washington with 72 stars, pentagrams. Not just stars, circled stars, pentagrams. Secondly, they dedicated the obelisk, the Washington Monument, 72 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And number 3, they placed 72 stones on the Great Seal's uncapped pyramid on the above which the eye of Horus, Osiris, Apollo stares. So now think about that. 3 sets of the number 72.